The Schizoid Core of a Narcissist, a review. This is a review for me, actually, but, come along for the ride. I first heard the term Schizoid Core sometime last year, but kind of early on. Surprise, surprise, it was Sam Vaknin who I heard say it. Of course, I thought to myself, what's that? I mean, if you can understand the core of something, or someone, you can really understand it, or them. But despite looking all over the place, I could only find this little concept popping up here and there in articles. And there never seemed to be a full explanation. It's like no one really knew what this thing was. So I thought, let's break this down. What does schizoid mean? Like you, I assumed, falsely, that it was something to do with schizophrenia, because that's not the case. What I found was things referring to the schizoid state, or schizoid personality disorder. What are those things? A schizoid state is basically a state of being where you are completely emotionally detached and numb. It's not depression, it's emotional emptiness, lack of emotional presence. What is schizoid personality disorder? People with schizoid personality disorder are characterized by a very, very limited range of emotional expression. They don't have very many emotions at all, and those that they do have are kind of like low volume. Sometimes they can hardly feel them. It's also characterised by a lack of interest in social interaction. They just don't seem to get anything out of it, so they kind of like prefer to be alone. And of course I thought, that doesn't sound like a narcissist to me. Narcissists absolutely need social interaction. Without it, they fall away from that false self and go into a collapse. So was I looking in the right place? I didn't know, but I started thinking about it. And I tested the idea inside of whether or not someone with schizoid personality disorder could develop a way of enjoying human interaction. And there was a bit of a light bulb moment when I realised that if they developed a false self and they got dopamine hits when people paid attention to character traits that they stole from others, that actually it might wake them out of the schizoid state and give them something to interact for. A raison d'être sociale. That probably doesn't mean what I think it means. And actually, I'd heard of the schizoid core being mentioned by people with NPD in my comments, saying that at the heart of their being is just a nothingness, and that's where they find themselves if they don't have any supply, if they run very, very low. Falling away from this false self would set off alarm bells. It would set off their fight-flight mode, their survival states, as they clawed onto it, so that they didn't go from someone who was kind of vibrant and full of dopamine and sort of socially recognized and integrated apparently, to someone who was just kind of lifeless inside. They desperately want to stay at the party. They don't want to end up in the desert. Understandable, but that's not what happens to normal people if they don't get attention. So basically that's the effect this phrase, schizoid core, had on me, and that's where my brain went. It certainly explained a huge number of different things. A narcissist's behaviour is all about avoidance of their bad objects inside, of things that they don't like feeling. The gaslighting, blame shifting and Darvo are all avoidance measures. They're there to prevent them from being spotted and told, actually, you're responsible for that. You should be holding yourself accountable. They can't regulate that. It's too much for them. They can't have any kind of ambivalence towards it. It negatively affects them in a really dreadful way. It might actually raise what might be termed a fear of annihilation. And of course, if that false self falls apart and they end up in that schizoid core that I was thinking about, that's basically what that is. The false self crumbles and is annihilated, and it's their only set of what they perceive to be good objects. It's the only way they can feel good about who they are, through this fantasy. So since they think they are this false self, without it, it's like they don't exist. I mean, who are we without emotions? How can there be identity without emotion? All there would be is a schizoid identity, which isn't much of an identity at all. Last year, sometime a bit later, I stumbled across something called object relations. This is a kind of slightly more modern version of psychoanalysis, created in this instance by someone called Melanie Klein. There are other object relations theorists. In Melanie Klein's theory of early childhood development, she suggests that the child kind of starts off in this position called the paranoid schizoid position. So there's that word again, schizoid. And now I assumed that I knew what she meant, until quite recently. And no, I was wrong. A according to my understanding of the word schizoid, Melanie Klein was actually misusing it. But yeah, I could be wrong. You might have detected that the way that I learn is constantly evolving. The way that she was using it was to refer to this concept, this idea that in the early infancy there's a tendency for splitting. This is where the infant's early view on objects around them in their environment or inside are actually either good or bad. They can't have mixed qualities, and they are separate entities. So in Klein's theory, schizoid doesn't mean this emotionally empty, numb state, but it's also paranoid schizoid. So what is that part, the paranoid part? Well, it turns out that part actually is more akin to the idea of paranoia, a fear of being attacked, or a perceived one at least. It's like a fear that these bad objects will destroy the good objects. If someone was stuck here emotionally in adulthood, they might be quite a paranoid individual actually. Now we know that people with NPD are notoriously paranoid individuals. Their reality was born in psychosis. In fact, they're actually somewhat departed from reality. They live life in a false narrative created in their early childhood, in which they are the main character and everyone else are just NPCs. Anything bad in their life that happens is either a total threat or it's recontextualized into this narrative in some way, that this is all just part of their destiny. So if there's someone in their life, or someone who's no longer in their life, that they perceive as a threat, they really, really see them as a threat. Now the next position or stage in Melanie Klein's theory is called the depressive position. Long story short, this is where complex emotions evolve, like guilt, remorse and empathy. And since a narcissist doesn't have those, we can kind of presume they got stuck in that earlier position, the paranoid schizoid position. Somebody stuck there as an adult, well, they would see the world and people in it as either all good or all bad. They would always be seeing some people as a threat, and they might idealize others. Without the full range of complex emotions, they're going to have some severe identity disturbance. Since they lack guilt, remorse and empathy, how do you think they're going to treat people that they perceive as bad objects? People they see as a threat. This kind of person, according to Melanie Klein, would project all of their negative feelings onto that person and try to damage them or even destroy them, and attempt to annihilate this bad object before it annihilates them, even if this is a partner in their life that loves them. Love is the most complex emotion of all. They don't have the capacity to do that, and the way that we experience true love from others is not the way they experience our love to them. We fell in love with who we believed they were. They fell in love with our reactions to their mask. Can you see how nicely that description from Melanie Klein's theory blended straight into me speaking about a narcissist? Did you notice that blend? Probably not. Now, what sort of things could actually keep a child there? In that place where they're splitting everything into good and bad objects all the time? Inconsistent parenting, abuse, lack of modelling of empathy from their caregiver, the modelling of splitting behaviour, witnessing idealisation, and witnessing devaluation, and experiencing it. Basically, born into narcissistic abuse, the very thing we experienced. But we merely adopted the dog. They were born in it, moulded by it. Which means that unlike them, we can heal from what they left us with.